So the new SAO spin-off, SAO Alternative, is out, and the first episode was rather entertaining. It seems to be taking a different approach in its tone and attitude, and maybe taking itself a little less seriously than the main series. I mean, the main character has a completely pink outfit and a fucking bunny hat in a gritty, dark, tactical-based shooter. But I digress. It's very important that this first episode started out and made it apparent what its goal as a spin-off is. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It did, on the other hand, give us a glimpse into how the game is played and how characters work around its systems. First episodes in any show are the most important. It's the thing that's supposed to grab you, make you its bitch, and continue to make you slowly go insane for every second you're not getting more of it. It has to set up the plot or give you a basis of what to expect from the rest of the show. A lot of people say that the 3-episode test is the golden rule, but if a first episode isn't good enough to make you want to watch the other two, then that rule is fucking worthless. SAO isn't a show that masterfully sets up its plot with the first episode, and Reki Kawahara's writing style is more prone to dump a shit ton of exposition on you rather than letting the game or characters breathe and show you what they're about. The whole show don't tell thing seems to be lost on him. Fortunately for us, SAO Alternative isn't written by Reki Kawahara. It's written by Keiichi Sugsawa, the guy who made a little gem called Kino's Journey, which got a remake last October. You can clearly tell the differences in the first episodes of each series, so I want to go over the first episodes of SAO, SAO2, and SAO Alternative. Also, I'm taking this in the perspective of not seeing the rest of the series, so I don't skew my observations of each episode. SAO Alternative follows the story of Len, a short girl whose speed helps her dodge attacks and counter with close-range assaults. She's working with a guy named M to compete in the Squad Jam, a battle royale competition that pits 26 teams against each other to see who will win. It's basically Fortnite except cooler. Through the first episode, we see them battle against a team that has actual combat experience, so they have to use strategies to beat them while looking out for other players as well. In terms of skill and manpower, they're completely outmatched, so they set up an ambush to try and take the guys all at once. Len takes out 4 guys in a matter of seconds, thanks to her speed and strategy in a fight sequence that is actually impressive. She uses dead players to shield herself because she's small enough to, and then zips around to finish off the rest. It's a short action scene, but it gives us enough to go on that we get a good look at her character. The episode as a whole is slow-paced. M is often explaining strategies and predictions of what they should do and where they should go. The overall vibe gives me the sense that the story wants to be very slow and strategy-based and only give action in short bursts. The characters that are loud and out in the open get picked off easily by players who are always on their guard and planning their next move. There's only about 3 action scenes, including Len's, and they're all resolved in a short time. This show wastes no time throwing you right into it either. You get about a minute of exposition, the opening, and then you're right in the thick of it. The only thing that I can nitpick from that is that the story expects you to know a couple of the things from Gun Gale Online, like the map scan and the brief red sightlines. I can't really blame them though, it is a spin-off, so they expect you to know the show. I think overall it's accessible enough so that newcomers can pick up the show fairly easily, but I also watched most of GGO, so my view might be a little biased. The episode gives us a good estimation of what the season might be as a whole, but it doesn't give us what the goal of any of the characters are going to be. Which is fine. Len and M were entertaining enough to carry the episode without that. It was nice to see them in tense situations but not have the stakes be another death game. I personally just want to know more about what the characters are going to go through right off the bat, and the first episode of SAO does that actually pretty well. SAO gets a lot of shit, but separating the first episode from the rest of the series makes me remember when people had a lot of hope for this show. People getting trapped in a video game that just so happens to be trying to kill you is a pretty cool idea, and the first episode capitalizes on its premise fairly well. It opens with a short news broadcast explaining the newest virtual reality game, Sword Art Online, just released. Kirito boots up the game, and for the slightest of fucking seconds, we can tell that he was a part of the beta and is using his character from that. He seems really excited to be back in SAO, which I'll go more into later. He then meets his first friend, Klein, in like, the weirdest way. Kirito is running through the streets and Klein is just like, "Hey dude, you look like you know your way around. You were in the beta test, right?" Kirito's like, "Yeah," and then Klein asks him to teach him the basics. This is probably the laziest way you could get 2 characters to meet. There is literally no indication that Kirito has any prior knowledge of the game. He could have just been running through the town trying to meet up with a friend, or he could have already been through this part of town and was just running for whatever reason to get somewhere else. Klein doesn't know. Kirito is a fucking stranger. What follows is a scene of Kirito showing Klein how they don't feel pain in VR and how their sword skills work. 2 rather important things we as the viewers should be aware of. One thing that irks me is how poorly the skills themselves are explained. You have to do a motion input, wait for the skill to activate, and then release it. But what does any of that mean? Kirito and Klein both pulled their arms back to activate the skill, so is it only activated on thrust attacks? Kirito threw a rock and it activated, so does that mean that almost any object can be used as a weapon? Could Klein just buy a shit ton of lamps and go kill monsters with them? These are questions that must be answered. We see Kirito and Klein just chilling on some beautiful looking scenery while talking about their feelings on the game so far. Kirito explains that when he was beta testing, he couldn't think about anything else besides SAO. Another small important detail that I'll explain later. This is when we start to get into the plot. Klein isn't able to log out, so he and Kirito are worried about there being a glitch in the server. Then they're transported to an area with all the other players in the game where they meet the creator, Kayaba Akihiko. This bleeding from the sky bit is actually a nice touch. It conveys a sense of something not being exactly right with what's going on. Of course, the red sky helps as well. Okay, so this is the point where the episode loses me a little. Everyone is just in one area while Kayaba, Kirito, and Klein, that's a lot of K names, spout exposition for fucking 6 minutes. Nothing interesting happens. All that's explained is that they're stuck in the game, need to beat it to get out, and if they die in the game, they die in real life. There's nothing remotely redeeming about this scene, besides that all the randos are freaking the fuck out about the faceless man in the sky and the fact that they're probably all gonna die, which I thought was kind of funny, but it's not enough to make the scene any less boring. Once the scene is over and all the players look like their normal selves, which is actually kind of funny, Kirito talks to Klein about going to the next town because he's confident he can get there safely even at level 1. Klein declines so he can help out his other friends that Kirito seems to be wary of. Kirito then sets off alone to make his way through the game. This episode moves at a much faster rate than SAO Alternative, but for a good reason. It sets up the end goal for the arc, introduces us to Kirito and Klein's newly formed friendship, gives us the base mechanics of the game, and gives us hints at Kirito's character that I'll go into later. I know I've said I'll go into some character detail stuff later like 3 times, but it's coming, I promise. The pacing is brisk and wants to get so much done in such a short time that there are things that make it feel chaotic. Like how Kirito and Klein meet and how the skills are explained. It all feels rushed for the sake of getting to Kayaba, which is absolutely the worst scene in the episode. There's also not really any action to keep our attention throughout the episode. Kirito and Klein kill like 2 things and that's it. There's definitely more of a focus on setting up the plot and the basics of the game than putting us into an atmosphere like SAO Alternative. This brings us to the start of Season 2, which is just fucking bad. The shots of the city in the beginning are literally the most interesting thing we see throughout the whole goddamn episode. I'm going to list off what this episode does right and what it does wrong up front now so I don't have to explain all this bullshit. What it does right, it gives us a kinda cool scene with Death Gun, and it gives Kirito a motivation to do something else besides dick around all day. Albeit coming out of nowhere. What it does wrong, it gives us possibly the most boring exposition scenes I've ever fucking seen. Like, seriously, remember when I said earlier that Reki Kawahara is just prone to dump a whole shit ton of exposition on you at once? This is the shit I'm talking about. To all aspiring writers, if you want to make a compelling story, don't ass blast the viewer with exposition and dialogue, which makes watching paint dry a better alternative. Like, the scene with Kirito and what's-his-fuck in the cafe takes up half the fucking episode, and all they're doing is sitting there talking about who gives a fuck. Think about this scene and why this schmuck is here in the first place. He's here to see if Kirito will help stop Death Gun, but there's no significant attachment to Death Gun. He hasn't killed anyone we care about. In fact, all he's done so far is shut up this douchey blue-haired guy that was already pissing a ton of people off. Why should I care? What wrong has he done to me? Just because he's killing people doesn't automatically make me want to watch someone stop him. Let's say if Klein was playing GGO and Death Gun killed him, not only would that make me emotionally invested, but that would also make Kirito emotionally invested. Aside from that, Death Gun is now considered a murderer. I repeat, murderer! And they want Kirito to be the one to go after him. The dude gives 2 reasons for this. One is because Kirito was considered the strongest player in SAO. But why would that mean he should be the one to go into GGO? How could you possibly think that his skill would transfer over into that game? Reason number 2 is that he has no one else. Really? You have literally no one else? Nobody thought it'd be a good idea to create like some special task force that could go into VR games and stop any suspicious or illegal activity that was going on. You'd think everyone would have learned their lesson after the first 2 times shit like this happened, but no. Apparently they have to send in a fucking child who may or may not have PTSD from being in another fucked up virtual world. What a great fucking idea. This episode does nothing to keep viewer interest, set up the tone of the show, or give us any emotional attachment to what's going on. It tells us that the hero needs to go beat up the bad guy because reasons. Oh, and Shinon's there too, I guess. Who thought this was a good idea? How did people defend this shit? I'm glad the spin-off of GGO gets this shit better than the actual thing. SAO Alternative's first episode comes out as a better product than the first episode of SAO and SAO2 because of one incredibly important thing: the main character. Okay, so I'm going to be referring to Kirito a lot in this next part, so to make everything less confusing for everyone, I'm going to call the Kirito from SAO Kirito, and I'm going to call the Kirito from SAO2 Dickface. Got it? Good. Len and Kirito are both incredibly skilled at their respective games, but there is a gigantic difference in their personalities. Kirito is obsessed with SAO. When he gets back into the world, he's ecstatic to be back, and when he's talking to Klein, he reflects on how he couldn't think about anything else besides SAO during the beta. He's so wrapped up in his games that he kinda closes himself off from others. He hesitates to talk to Klein at first, and he definitely doesn't like the idea of teaming up with more than one player, the other player being Klein. Len, on the other hand, doesn't seem to get too caught up with GGO. There's a small little throwaway line where Len says she wouldn't have shown up to the squad jam if she got a ticket for a concert she wanted to go to. This tells me that she's not all that worried about what seems to be a rather big event and would have preferred doing something else. It's a huge perspective shift from having someone who's an introvert, diehard gamer being your protagonist, to someone who's probably doing this just because it's fun. Now, I'm not saying that I think Len is like an extroverted social butterfly, but she definitely shows a broader range of emotions than Kirito does. Both of their ages have to be taken into consideration as well. Kirito is like 14 at the beginning of the show, so it makes sense that he'd be on the shyer side. Not every teenager has to be loud and obnoxious. Len is played by a girl named Karen, who looks to be on the older side. I can't really tell how old she is though. These girls call her Miss Karen, but I wouldn't think that she's one of their moms or something. Maybe an older sister? It's hard to tell. It's totally believable that she wouldn't be wrapped up in games all the time at this point, as she probably has a job or something, as her adolescence is behind her now. So Kirito and Dickface are no longer the same character. It's been about 3 years since the start of SAO when we see Dickface, and he's changed considerably. He doesn't seem as obsessed with games as he was, and his priorities have shifted to wanting to make gaming technology. He wants to help create augmented reality so his girlfriend and their virtual daughter can live together. Dickface's motivations may have changed, but he's just bland now. He's not as relatable as Kirito, and he's nowhere near as lovable as Len. It also doesn't help that most of his dialogue is fucking exposition, so we can't even see him in any unique scenarios. Out of the 3, Len is hands down the most interesting and likable character, but I can see younger audiences relating to and projecting themselves onto Kirito. And Dickface? Well, he's just a dickface. The second episode of SAO Alternative should be releasing the same day as this video. I'm excited to see where it'll go and if it'll try and improve on what ultimately killed the main series for a lot of people. I have hope for it, and I think you should too. If you liked the video, hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all the new shit I put out. Share the video and go follow me on Twitter. Love and peace, everyone.